Welcome back to the channel. Today we're breaking down the 7 used Harley Davidson motorcycles you should never buy due to engine problems. From overpriced to underwhelming, these bikes are not worth it. Let's dive in. Number 7. Harley Davidson Twin Cam 88. The Twin Cam 88 was supposed to be Harley's future. Released in 2001, this engine was designed to replace the Evolution engine and bring the brand into the new millennium. More power, more torque, a smooth ride with that legendary Harley feel. And for a while it seemed like a dream. Riders loved the deep-throated exhaust note, the 1,450 cubic centimeters of raw power, and the improved handling compared to older models. But then problems started. Not small ones, big ones. Problems so bad that some owners had to replace their entire engine, and it all came down to one critical failure point. This engine had a fatal flaw: plastic cam chain tensioners. Now, if you know anything about motorcycles, you already see the problem. Instead of using a gear-driven cam system, which had been proven reliable in performance engines, Harley decided to cut costs. They installed plastic tensioners to keep the cam chains in place. And here's the thing, plastic wears out. Over time, as the cam chains moved, these tensioners would grind down to nothing, sending plastic debris into the oil system. And once they failed, it was game over. If you didn't catch it in time, your engine would be running with loose timing chains, which could cause catastrophic failure. Now, if you were lucky, you caught this problem before it was too late. Some riders replaced the stock system with a gear-driven cam upgrade, which solved the issue. But if you're looking at a used Twin Cam 88 today, there's a good chance those stock tensioners are still inside, grinding away, waiting to fail. So if you see one of these for sale, you better ask the right questions. Has the cam chain system been replaced? If the seller hesitates or says no, walk away, because if those tensioners fail, you're looking at a repair bill of anywhere between $2,000 and $5,000. And let me tell you, I've seen guys get quoted repair costs higher than what they paid for the bike. Some riders ended up just scrapping the engine entirely and swapping in an aftermarket S&S motor. At that point, why even buy the bike in the first place? This should have been the end of the story. A bad design. A lesson learned. But guess what? Harley didn't learn a damn thing, because the next engine on our list, it had the exact same cam chain tensioner problem. Number 6. Harley Davidson Twin Cam 96. It looks perfect. Strong lines, a classic profile, and that unmistakable Harley presence. The Twin Cam 96 was supposed to be the future of Harley Davidson. Released in 2007, it promised more power, smoother performance, and better reliability. Harley called it an upgrade from the Twin Cam 88. Riders expected a better machine, but what they got was another mechanical disaster. This engine was supposed to fix the issues that plagued its predecessor, but instead it introduced a new nightmare. Riders started experiencing a problem that left their Harleys gutless, sluggish, and dangerously unreliable. It's called oil sumping. And if you own a Twin Cam 96, you need to pay attention. See, Harley made changes to the oiling system, and in theory these updates should have improved lubrication. But in reality, they caused oil to collect in the crankcase instead of returning to the oil tank. And that means less oil circulating through the engine, starving critical parts of lubrication. And when an engine doesn't get proper lubrication, bad things happen. Riders reported overheating, loss of power, and premature wear on the internal components. Some bikes would just cut out mid-ride. Others would run dangerously hot, cooking the internals until they finally gave out. Some guys started noticing these problems within the first 10,000 miles, and when they took their bikes to the shop, mechanics knew exactly what the problem was. They had seen it before, over and over again. Fixing this issue isn't cheap. Harley released an updated oil pump, but even that wasn't a guaranteed fix. If you're buying a used Twin Cam 96, you better hope the previous owner upgraded the oil system. If they didn't, you're looking at a $3,000 repair bill, and that's if the damage isn't already done. But the worst part? Harley didn't just stop at the Twin Cam 96, because next up, they took this exact same engine and made it even bigger. And with that extra power came even bigger problems. Number 5. Harley Davidson Davidson Twin Cam 103. If the Twin Cam 96 had oiling issues, you would think Harley Davidson would have fixed the problem in their next engine. But instead, they made it bigger, hotter, and even more prone to failure. The Twin Cam 103 was supposed to be the ultimate upgrade. More displacement, more torquey, and a better ride for long-distance cruising. But what riders got was an engine that could turn a dream road trip into a mechanical nightmare. Introduced in 2012, the Twin Cam 103 became the new standard engine for Harley's touring models. Riders loved the extra power, especially for highway cruising. It pulled harder, it had that classic low-end grunt, and it seemed like a real improvement. But underneath that extra muscle, the same flaws that plagued the Twin Cam 96 were still lurking. Oil sumping was still an issue, and in some cases it was even worse. With the increased displacement, this engine generated more heat, and that put even more stress on the oiling system. More heat meant thinner oil, which led to increased wear on critical engine components. Some owners reported their bikes feeling sluggish after long rides, while others noticed excessive vibration that just didn't feel right. But the biggest problem? The crankshaft runout. This issue wasn't just bad, it was so bad that even experienced Harley mechanics dreaded working on these bikes. The crankshaft in the Twin Cam 103 had excessive side-to-side movement, something that Harley never fully addressed. And if the crankshaft runout became too extreme, it could lead to major engine damage, misalignment issues, and premature bearing failure. Some owners didn't notice the problem right away, but once the vibration started creeping in, there was no ignoring it. Some riders even reported cam chain tensioners wearing out faster than normal because of the excessive movement in the bottom end. And when those tensioners fail, you already know what happens next. If the crankshaft is out of spec, you're looking at a complete bottom-end rebuild, and that can cost you over $4,000. And just when you thought Harley had put their engine troubles behind them, their next generation of motors brought a whole new set of issues. Because up next, we're talking about the Milwaukee 8, a modern engine with a problem so bad that some owners had to get their bikes repaired under warranty within the first few thousand miles. When Harley Davidson introduced the Milwaukee 8 in 2017, it was supposed to be the engine that finally solved all the issues of the Twin Cam era. Riders were promised a smoother, cooler running engine with more power, better efficiency, and fewer mechanical failures. And to be fair, in some ways, it delivered. The Milwaukee 8 had more torque, less vibration, and a refined fuel system. But what Harley didn't tell riders was that this engine came with a whole new set of problems. The first issue was something that caught many owners by surprise: oil migration. On paper, the Milwaukee 8 was supposed to have a redesigned oiling system that prevented many of the lubrication problems that plagued the Twin Cam. But in reality, the system had a flaw that caused oil to transfer from the primary case to the transmission. That might not sound like a big deal until you realize that as oil levels drop in the primary case, the clutch starts slipping, shifting becomes rough, and in some cases, gears start grinding. This wasn't just a small issue, it became such a widespread problem that some bikes had to be repaired under warranty within the first few thousand miles. Riders who noticed slipping clutches or jerky gear shifts often discovered that the oil had migrated away from where it was needed most, and if it wasn't caught in time, serious transmission damage. Some owners even had to replace their clutches entirely. But oil migration wasn't the only issue with the Milwaukee 8. Another common complaint? Extreme heat. Now let's be honest, Harley Davidson motorcycles have always run hot, but the Milwaukee 8, it ran hotter than ever. Part of the problem came from the lean fuel mapping, which Harley used to meet strict emissions regulations. The result? A bike that felt like a furnace between your legs. But for anyone looking at a used Milwaukee 8 today, you need to do your research. Up next, we're going to talk about an engine that was so unreliable, so poorly designed that it nearly ruined Harley's reputation in the 1970s. Number 3. Harley Davidson AMF Shovelhead. There's a period in Harley Davidson's history that many riders wish they could forget. A time when quality control was questionable at best, and when buying a brand new Harley meant you were also buying a toolkit and a lot of patience. And at the heart of this dark chapter was the AMF era Shovelhead. If you're thinking about buying one of these used today, don't. In the early 1970s, Harley Davidson was struggling. Japanese motorcycle manufacturers were dominating the market, offering faster, cheaper, and more reliable bikes. Harley, on the other hand, was falling behind. In an effort to stay afloat, they sold the company to American Machine and Foundry, or AMF. And that's when things went downhill. AMF focused on mass production, not quality, and the Shovelhead, which was already a finicky engine, became a complete nightmare. First, there were the oil leaks. Now, every Harley owner knows that a little bit of oil seepage is just part of the experience. But the AMF Shovelhead took it to a whole new level. These bikes leaked from everywhere. Gaskets, pushrod tubes, even the cases themselves. No matter how many times you tighten things down, the leaks never really stopped. Some riders even carried extra oil with them everywhere they went, but leaks weren't the only problem. These engines were also notorious for poor machining tolerances. That means parts didn't fit together properly from the factory. Cam bearings would wear out way too soon. Piston rings wouldn't seat correctly, and valve guides would loosen up far before their time. And when you combine that with a weak charging system, you had a bike that was constantly breaking down. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some hardcore Harley riders who still love the AMF Shovelhead. Some say it has character, and some have rebuilt them into dependable machines. But if you're looking at buying one used today, you better be ready to wrench on it constantly. And unless you're getting it as a project bike or for nostalgia, stay away. But here's the thing, Harley eventually broke free from AMF and they started making better bikes again. But before that happened, they released one last engine that was so flawed, it was the final straw before Harley had to change its entire approach to engineering. And that's what we're talking about next. Number 2. Harley Davidson Evolution. By the early 1980s, Harley Davidson had a serious problem. The AMF years had damaged the brand's reputation, and riders were fed up with bikes that leaked oil, shook themselves apart, and needed constant repairs. Harley needed a fresh start, something that would finally fix their reliability issues and bring back the quality their customers expected. And that's when they introduced the Evolution engine. It was supposed to be Harley's comeback, but while the Evo engine did a lot of things right, it also had its own set of problems that make some models a risky buy today. On the surface, the Evolution engine looked like a massive improvement. It had better cooling, fewer leaks, and more horsepower than the Shovelhead. And most importantly, it was reliable. Harley owners who had spent years dealing with constant breakdowns finally had a bike that they could trust on long rides. But here's the thing, not all Evo engines were created equal. If you're looking at buying a used Harley with an Evolution engine today, you need to pay attention to which model and year you're getting. The biggest issue? Weak bottom-end components. While the Evo was a major upgrade over the Shovelhead, Harley was still using inferior materials in the early years. Some of the bottom-end components, like the crank bearings and connecting rods, were not built to handle aggressive riding. And if those fail, you're looking at a full engine rebuild. And then there's the oil circulation problem. Early Evo engines had a poorly designed oiling system, which meant that if oil flow wasn't perfectly maintained, certain parts of the engine weren't getting enough lubrication. Over time, this led to increased wear on the camshaft lobes and could eventually cause catastrophic failure. If you're buying an older Evo, you need to make sure it's had all the proper upgrades and regular maintenance. And let's talk about heat. The Evo was an air-cooled engine, which meant that if you rode it hard in hot weather or stop-and-go traffic, it could overheat quickly. This wasn't much of a problem when the engine was new, but if you're looking at a 30 or 40-year-old Evo today, you have to ask yourself, how many times has this engine been overheated? Because excessive heat cycles can cause warped heads and blown gaskets. Now, don't get me wrong, the Evolution engine was a huge step forward for Harley. It saved the company and helped build the modern Harley Davidson legacy. But if you're looking at one today, you better do your research. Some Evos are still going strong, but others, they're living on borrowed time. But the Evolution engine wasn't Harley's last major redesign. Up next, we're going to talk about a Harley model that was supposed to take the brand in a bold new direction. But instead, it left dealers stuck with unsold inventory and riders questioning its identity. Number 1. Harley Davidson Street 750 and 500. Harley Davidson has always been known for its big, powerful V-twins, built for long highway rides and loud, unmistakable presence. But in the mid-2000s, Harley realized they had a problem. Their customer base was aging and younger riders weren't buying their bikes. So, in an effort to attract new riders, city commuters, and beginners, Harley launched something completely different, the Street Series. On paper, it seemed like a smart move. But in reality, it became one of the most disappointing Harley models ever made. The Street Series, which included the Street 750 and Street 500, was Harley's attempt to compete in the lightweight, entry-level motorcycle market. The idea was simple: build an affordable, easy-to-ride Harley that could go head-to-head with bikes like the Honda Rebel and Yamaha Bolt. But the problem? It didn't feel like a Harley at all. The biggest issue was the engine itself. Harley introduced a brand new liquid-cooled Revolution X V-twin, and while it was supposed to be smooth and efficient, it lacked the signature Harley character. It was whiny, underpowered, and uninspiring. Riders who expected the deep rumble of a Harley were instead met with an engine that sounded closer to a sewing machine than a cruiser. But sound wasn't the only problem. The street models were also plagued with mechanical issues. Owners reported stalling problems, poor throttle response, and rough idling. Some bikes even had fuel pump failures and electrical gremlins that left riders stranded. And to make matters worse, the build quality was nowhere near Harley's usual standards. Cheap plastics, weak welds, and misaligned parts made these bikes feel more like a budget import than an American cruiser. And here's the real kicker: dealers couldn't sell them. Harley loyalists didn't want them because they felt like cheap, uninspired copies of the real thing. And new riders? They quickly realized they could get a better bike for less money from another brand. Within a few years, Harley quietly discontinued the Street Series, admitting defeat in a market they were never really built for. If you're looking at a used street model today, you have to ask yourself why. Because for the same price, you could get a better built, more reliable, and more powerful motorcycle. These bikes just don't hold their value, and the maintenance issues make them not worth the hassle. But as bad as the Street Series was, it's nothing compared to the next Harley we're about to talk about. Up next, a bike that was so poorly received, so confusing in its design, that it left riders wondering, who was this even made for? And that's it. 7 used Harley Davidsons you might want to avoid. Did you own one of these? Tell us your experience in the comments. If you enjoyed this, check out more videos on our channel for deep dives into Harley's best and worst bikes. Like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Ride safe.